Let's talk 5 tips for our pirouette. Now, first and foremost, practice is important. So you should be practicing these all the time. Practice makes progress, so make sure you are practicing. Tip number 1, the distance of your feet away from one another and away from the base of the pole is important. So if your feet are too close to the pole, you're not going to be able to pass your body underneath. If your feet are too far away, it's going to be really hard to pass your body around because you're going to have to stick your booty out to balance over your feet. Now, not only do we want to make sure that our feet are a good distance from the pole, but if you're going to pirouette on both feet, you want to make sure that they're equidistant from each other as they are from the pole, creating a tripod. I like to bring my foot about a human foot distance away from the pole, if not a little bit more. You can think 6 to 9 inches, a $100 bill, or whatever it is that helps you remember, you want your feet a good distance away from the pole. And that will be different for every person, so make sure you play around with it. Tip number 2 is we want to make sure we're stacking our body. So shoulders over hips, hips over ankles, or heels, especially if you're in releve. So as I go through my pirouette, I want to avoid sticking my booty out too far and arching my back as I come through. We really want to think about keeping the shoulders over hips, hips over knees. So as I pass through, I have this nice solid stand, thinking about tucking in my core, pulling in my rib cage, distributing the weight evenly between my feet. If I'm only going on one foot, making sure all of my weight is stacked over that foot as I come underneath. If you're doing both feet, same thing. We want to think plant the feet, evenly distribute the shoulders over the hips between the feet. Think about making sure that everything is even and stacked, like if you were carrying a bunch of boxes. You would want them stacked perfectly on top of one another, not offset because you would drop them. Tip number 3. On top of this weight shifting around over our feet, we want to think of our weight shifting back and forth using the pole to help us. So when I go to start my pirouette, I'm actually leaning away from the pole. When I come into my pirouette, I'm using the bottom arm to lean into the pole. That way, as I come through, I can lean away and press back in using that forearm to slow me down. Use the pole to help you. You can pirouette without one, but if you use the pole, let yourself lean away and towards using the pole to hold your weight. So again, that bottom hand is pushing into the pole, top hand pulling away. Then as I rotate under, I'm leaning into the top arm so that I can roll up and use my own body weight to help me pass through the pirouette. Tip number 4, where are you looking? So when we're doing our pirouette, oftentimes people are trying to get their head out of the way, and we don't want to do that. As I come underneath for my pirouette, I want to think about smelling my armpit. But don't actually do it, just think about it. So I'm actually tucking my head towards my top arm. As I come underneath, that head stays right underneath that top arm. I don't want to think about trying to get my head through before anything else because I lose my stack. My head is the top box in my stack. It needs to balance over my body. So my head stays right by that top arm, no matter how many pirouettes I do, so that my ear is pressing against my bicep, making sure that I keep that solid stack. Now, tip number 5 is one of my favorites that a lot of people don't use. If you're doing this wrist roll pirouette, make sure that when you wrist roll, you flex your hand. That's how we're leaning away. So as I come underneath, I want a hard flex. That's what's allowing me to lean away before I lean in to grip. So I'm using that hard flex as part of my leaning to pass through my pirouette. So there's your 5 tips. Tip number 1, the distance of your feet. Tip number 2, the stacking of your body. Tip number 3, the weight shift back and forth. Tip number 4, where are you looking? And tip number 5, that hard flex. And bonus tip, make sure you're doing your pirouette on both sides.